The most dangerous secrets are not hidden inside locked vaults, but behind the tiers of people no one thinks to notice. Emily Brooks stood motionless outside the solid walnut door leading to William Carter's private office, clutching a cream-colored envelope so tightly that its edges had begun to bend beneath her trembling fingers. She had practiced this moment over and over inside the quiet privacy of her small room at the estate, convincing herself that all she needed to do was knock once, step inside, thank her employer for 6 unforgettable months, leave the letter on his desk, and quietly walk away. Instead, every ounce of courage she believed she possessed disappeared the instant she reached the hallway. Beyond the closed door, calm voices drifted through the polished corridor as William and his senior advisors discussed investment reports, charitable projects, and meetings scheduled weeks into the future. Everything inside that room sounded orderly, controlled, and predictable. Everything outside it felt painfully uncertain. Emily lowered her eyes, trying to steady her breathing before anyone passing through the hallway noticed the tears collecting beneath her lashes. She had spent her entire life believing that invisible people caused the fewest problems. Today, however, remaining invisible suddenly hurt more than being seen. The marble floor reflected the afternoon sunlight pouring through towering windows, making the hallway appear almost impossibly peaceful, yet her heart pounded loudly enough that she wondered if someone inside the office might hear it. She raised her hand toward the polished brass handle, stopped only inches away, then slowly let it fall again. The envelope pressed against her chest contained only a few carefully written sentences, but to Emily it felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. She silently whispered an apology to herself, wiped away a tear with the sleeve of her neatly pressed navy uniform, and promised that she would try one more time. Before she could gather the strength to move, a cell phone rang from inside the office. The steady conversation immediately stopped. William glanced at the unfamiliar number, flashing across the screen before answering with the calm confidence everyone expected from him. Around the long conference table, no one spoke while he listened. Within seconds, something changed. The color slowly drained from his face. His shoulders stiffened. The papers lying neatly before him no longer held his attention. His eyes shifted toward the office door as though he could suddenly see through the heavy wood separating him from the hallway beyond. Every executive present exchanged uncertain glances, silently wondering what news could unsettle a man whose composure rarely faltered. William remained perfectly still for another moment, listening carefully until the caller finished speaking. Then he lowered the phone, rose from his chair so quickly that it rolled backward across the hardwood floor, and looked directly toward the closed door with an expression none of his colleagues had ever witnessed. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, yet powerful enough to silence the entire room, he spoke 4 simple words that instantly changed everything. Find Emily. Right now. 6 months earlier, Emily Brooks arrived at the Carter estate with 2 modest suitcases, a recommendation letter folded neatly inside her purse, and a quiet promise to herself that this job would be different from every one that had come before it. The sprawling property stretched across several acres overlooking the Hudson River, its elegant limestone walls and towering windows reflecting a life that felt impossibly distant from her own. She paused for only a second before walking through the front gates, taking one deep breath and reminding herself that every new beginning started with a single step. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, the estate manager, greeted her with calm professionalism and a reassuring smile. She explained the routines of the household, introduced the staff, outlined the daily schedule, and ended with one simple piece of advice. Do your work with honesty, respect everyone's privacy, and this house will treat you with the same respect in return. Emily thanked her sincerely because respect had become something she valued more than comfort. During her first week, she learned every hallway before sunrise, memorized the placement of priceless artwork, and quickly discovered that the estate functioned with remarkable precision. Fresh flowers appeared every Monday morning. Breakfast was served promptly at 6:30. Meetings filled William Carter's schedule almost every afternoon. Every employee understood their responsibilities, and every small detail mattered. Emily blended naturally into that rhythm without ever trying to stand out. If another housekeeper fell behind because of unexpected guests, Emily quietly stayed an extra hour to help finish the rooms before anyone noticed. When the kitchen unexpectedly ran short of prepared desserts before a charity dinner, she rolled up her sleeves and assisted the pastry chef until everything was ready. On cold mornings, she carried steaming coffee to the groundskeepers before they asked because she remembered how difficult long hours outdoors could become. She never announced what she had done afterward. To her, kindness only mattered when it expected nothing in return. William Carter occasionally passed through the hallways surrounded by assistants discussing meetings, community projects, and foundation events. Emily always stepped respectfully aside, lowering her eyes while allowing the conversations to continue uninterrupted. William acknowledged employees with quiet courtesy, but his demanding schedule rarely allowed him to notice individual moments unfolding around him. To him, Emily was another dependable member of an outstanding household staff. To Emily, William was a fair employer whose reputation for discipline matched everything she observed from a respectful distance. Neither of them realized that the smallest acts inside that mansion were slowly weaving together a story neither could have imagined. Day after day, Emily continued leaving behind invisible traces of compassion that blended so naturally into the rhythm of the estate that everyone benefited from them without stopping to wonder who had quietly made their lives just a little easier. Sometimes the greatest influence belongs to the person whose name is spoken the least, and inside the Carter estate, that unseen truth was becoming stronger with every passing sunrise. As the weeks quietly turned into months, Emily Brooks became the kind of person people depended on without ever realizing how much they depended on her. Before sunrise, she was already walking through the silent halls with fresh linens folded neatly over one arm, making certain every room reflected the same warmth and order she believed every home deserved. If a vase stood slightly crooked, she straightened it without hesitation. If a guest accidentally left behind a cherished belonging, she carefully returned it before anyone noticed it was missing. If a coworker looked overwhelmed after an exhausting morning, Emily somehow found time to finish part of that person's responsibilities before returning to her own. None of those moments appeared in staff reports, yet together they quietly shaped the atmosphere of the Carter estate. The kitchen staff noticed that difficult mornings always seemed easier when Emily was nearby. The gardeners smiled whenever she carried cold lemonade outside during unusually hot afternoons, insisting they deserved a short break after working beneath the summer sun. Even the newest employees quickly discovered that whenever they made an honest mistake, Emily never criticized them. She simply showed them the correct way with patience that made embarrassment disappear. Mrs. Harper watched these small interactions from a distance and gradually realized something remarkable. Emily was not simply completing assigned tasks. She was creating an environment where everyone else felt respected. William Carter remained occupied with expanding his business, attending foundation events, and meeting community leaders across New York. His calendar rarely contained an empty hour, yet he always expected the estate to function flawlessly whenever he returned home. It did, although he never understood how many quiet acts of generosity made that possible. More than once he complimented the immaculate condition of the library without knowing Emily had repaired a damaged display only minutes before his arrival. He thanked the chef for another excellent dinner, unaware that Emily had spent nearly 2 hours helping prepare desserts after an unexpected equipment problem delayed the kitchen. Every Friday afternoon, homemade oatmeal cookies mysteriously appeared in the employee lounge. No one ever asked who baked them because everyone already knew, and everyone also understood that Emily preferred kindness to remain anonymous. Late each evening, after the mansion settled into peaceful silence, Emily returned to her modest room carrying a small blue notebook that rarely left her side. Inside were carefully written numbers, grocery receipts, appointment reminders, and pages filled with precise calculations. She studied each figure with quiet concentration, occasionally erasing an amount before writing another beside it. Sometimes she looked toward a framed family photograph resting on her bedside table and smiled with gentle determination despite the exhaustion visible beneath her eyes. Then she closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and prepared herself to greet another morning with the same calm expression that convinced everyone around her she had nothing more to carry than another ordinary day, while the truth remained hidden beneath a kindness so constant that it had become almost invisible. The first unusual phone call came on a quiet Wednesday afternoon while Emily Brooks was arranging fresh lilies in the main foyer. The moment her old cell phone vibrated inside her apron pocket, the warmth in her expression faded almost imperceptibly. She glanced at the screen, excused herself politely, and stepped into an empty supply room before answering in a voice so gentle it was barely louder than a whisper. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When she returned, she smiled at everyone exactly as she always did, yet there was a new heaviness behind her eyes that only someone watching very closely might have noticed. No one asked questions. Everyone at the Carter estate respected personal boundaries, and Emily had earned a reputation for handling every challenge with quiet grace. Over the following weeks, the calls became more frequent. Some arrived before dawn while she prepared coffee for the kitchen staff. Others interrupted the few minutes she allowed herself for lunch. Every time the phone rang, she walked somewhere private, listened more than she spoke, thanked the caller politely, and returned to work as though nothing had happened. At night, long after the mansion had fallen silent, a faint light continued glowing beneath the door of her modest room. Emily sat at a small wooden desk with her blue notebook open beside neatly stacked envelopes bearing the logo of St. Margaret Medical Center. One by one, she carefully reviewed every bill, every receipt, and every payment she had managed to make. She crossed out figures, recalculated totals, and quietly searched for another way to stretch money that had already been stretched beyond reason. Beside the notebook rested a framed photograph of her smiling mother sitting on a porch swing during healthier days. Emily gently touched the edge of the frame before closing her eyes for a brief moment, gathering enough strength to face another morning. The next day she arrived downstairs before anyone else, greeting coworkers with the same calm smile that had become part of the rhythm of the estate. Mrs. Harper noticed the growing exhaustion hidden beneath Emily's steady composure and quietly suggested she take several paid days off to rest. Emily thanked her sincerely but declined with quiet determination, explaining that staying busy helped her keep moving forward. The answer sounded simple, yet it concealed a reality she refused to place upon anyone else's shoulders. William Carter crossed paths with Emily several times during those weeks without realizing the silent struggle unfolding behind her unwavering professionalism. One afternoon he noticed she looked unusually tired and asked if everything was all right. Emily smiled politely, assured him she was simply catching up after a busy week, and wished him a pleasant afternoon before returning to her work. William accepted the explanation without another thought, unaware that every passing day was bringing Emily closer to an impossible decision. Then, late on a quiet Friday evening, her phone rang once more. She listened in complete silence, thanked the caller through trembling lips, and slowly lowered herself into the nearest chair. After several long minutes, she opened her blue notebook for what she believed would be the final time, took out a blank sheet of paper, and began writing a resignation letter while a single tear blurred the carefully chosen words before the ink had time to dry. Saturday morning arrived with the same peaceful rhythm that had defined every weekend inside the Carter estate for years, yet to Emily Brooks it felt completely different. She folded her resignation letter one final time, slipped it carefully into the cream-colored envelope, and placed it inside the pocket of her neatly pressed navy uniform. Every sentence had been rewritten until it contained nothing but gratitude. She thanked William Carter for giving her a chance when she needed one most. She thanked Mrs. Harper for her patience and kindness. She apologized for leaving without completing another season of work, but she never explained the true reason. Some burdens, she believed, were meant to be carried quietly. Throughout the morning she performed every responsibility exactly as she always had. She arranged fresh flowers throughout the mansion, polished the antique tables in the library, helped prepare the dining room for afternoon guests, and patiently showed a new employee how to care for the crystal display cabinets. She smiled whenever someone greeted her, silently wondering if this would be the last time she would walk through the elegant hallways that had slowly become a second home. Just before noon, Mrs. Harper informed the staff that William had returned early from an important business meeting and was reviewing documents with his executive team inside his private office before another conference call later that afternoon. Emily gently touched the envelope inside her pocket and realized the moment she had been dreading had finally arrived. She climbed the grand staircase with measured steps, each one feeling heavier than the last. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting long golden reflections across the polished marble floor while the quiet hallway stretched before her like a path she was no longer certain she had the strength to finish. She stopped outside the familiar walnut door and listened to the calm voices inside discussing future plans that seemed to belong to a completely different world. Emily slowly raised her hand toward the brass handle, but fear held it motionless in the air. She lowered it again, closed her eyes, and tried to steady her breathing. She had faced hardship before. She had faced uncertainty before. Yet saying goodbye to the place where she had finally been treated with genuine respect somehow felt more difficult than every challenge that had come before it. Minutes slipped quietly past. Employees walked through the hallway, offering friendly smiles before continuing with their responsibilities, unaware that Emily remained standing in exactly the same place. She pressed the envelope gently against her heart as tears escaped despite every effort to remain composed. At that exact moment, inside the office, William's cell phone suddenly rang. The unfamiliar number interrupted the meeting, drawing every eye toward him. He answered with calm professionalism, expecting another routine business conversation. Instead, as the voice on the other end carefully explained why they were calling, his expression changed almost instantly. The confidence disappeared from his face. The color slowly drained from his cheeks. His gaze shifted toward the office door, as though he suddenly sensed that the quiet young woman standing just beyond it had been carrying a story far greater than anyone inside that room had ever imagined. The voice on the other end belonged to the patient assistance coordinator at St. Margaret Medical Center, a woman who recognized William Carter's name because his charitable foundation had supported countless families over the years. She apologized for interrupting an important meeting but explained that an application requiring immediate verification had reached her desk only minutes earlier. William listened politely, still believing the call concerned another routine request for funding. Then she quietly spoke the name Emily Brooks. His expression changed before anyone in the conference room understood why. The coordinator explained that Emily had spent nearly a year caring for her mother through a long illness while working full-time without missing responsibilities at the Carter estate. She had exhausted her savings, sold her car, and gradually parted with nearly everything she owned of financial value before seeking outside assistance. Even then, she had refused to apply for emergency support several times because she believed limited resources should go first to families facing even greater hardship. Only after her mother's physician insisted that delaying treatment was no longer an option had Emily reluctantly completed the application. During the review, the hospital discovered that William Carter's foundation was one of the few organizations able to help immediately, so the coordinator called only to verify Emily's employment before moving the request forward. William remained silent as every small memory from the past 6 months returned with startling clarity. He remembered seeing Emily quietly carrying extra supplies after long charity events. He remembered fresh flowers appearing before important dinners without anyone taking credit. He remembered countless mornings when the estate somehow felt calmer, warmer, and more welcoming, yet he had never stopped to wonder who quietly created that feeling day after day. The coordinator hesitated before sharing one final detail. Emily had attached a handwritten note requesting that no one at the Carter estate be contacted unless verification became absolutely necessary. She explained that her employer had already given her dignity, stability, and honest work, and she never wanted her personal struggles to become someone else's responsibility. She also mentioned that she had submitted her resignation that morning because she needed to care for her mother full-time and hoped to leave without causing inconvenience to anyone. William slowly lowered the phone, unable to speak for several long seconds. Around the polished conference table, every executive watched the change unfolding before them in complete silence. Contracts worth millions of dollars suddenly seemed insignificant beside the quiet courage of one woman who had never asked for recognition despite carrying a burden almost impossible to imagine. William stood so quickly that his chair rolled backward across the hardwood floor. He looked toward the office door with a mixture of regret and determination unlike anything his colleagues had ever witnessed. In that single moment, he realized the strongest person inside the Carter estate had never been the man seated at the head of the table. It had been the quiet maid who believed leaving without asking for help was the kindest gift she could offer everyone around her. Taking one steady breath, William looked at his stunned advisors and spoke with calm certainty. The meeting is over. Emily Brooks matters more than anything on this schedule today. Find her before she walks out believing she faced all of this alone. Emily Brooks had already slipped the cream-colored envelope onto the corner of William Carter's desk while everyone inside the conference room remained focused on the unexpected phone call. She had done it quietly, exactly as she had done everything else during the past 6 months. Without interrupting anyone, she closed the office door behind her, walked through the marble hallway one final time, and made her way toward the front entrance carrying only her worn canvas bag. She thanked the security guard with a gentle smile, wished the kitchen staff a wonderful weekend as they passed through the foyer, and stepped outside beneath the warm afternoon sun. She never expected anyone to follow. Inside the mansion, William ended the call and immediately reached for the envelope lying on his desk. He recognized the careful handwriting before opening it. Every line reflected the same humility Emily had shown since the day she arrived. She thanked him for the opportunity to work in a home where she had always been treated with respect. She apologized for leaving on short notice and wished continued success to every member of the household. There was no complaint, no request for assistance, and no mention of the overwhelming burden she had been carrying alone. William folded the letter carefully and closed his eyes for a brief moment. The silence inside the conference room became almost impossible to ignore. Mrs. Harper entered. After hearing that the meeting had stopped unexpectedly. When William quietly asked where Emily was, she glanced toward the front windows and answered that Emily had just left through the main entrance less than a minute earlier. Without another word, William walked briskly through the hallway, surprising every employee who crossed his path. His assistants hurried behind him, unsure whether to cancel appointments or continue preparing for the afternoon schedule. William did not look at his phone, his watch, or the stack of documents waiting inside the conference room. None of those things mattered anymore. As he stepped onto the front terrace, he saw Emily walking steadily along the long stone driveway leading toward the front gate. The distance between them was not great, yet it suddenly felt as though months of missed opportunities stood in the space separating them. William called her name once, but a passing breeze carried his voice away before it reached her. He continued forward at a determined pace until Emily finally heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned slowly, immediately lowering her eyes when she realized it was William himself. Embarrassed that he had interrupted his own meeting for her, she quietly apologized and explained that she had left her resignation letter inside because she did not want to disturb him during such an important discussion. She thanked him once again for every opportunity he had given her and assured him the household would continue running smoothly without her. William listened without interrupting. For the first time since meeting Emily Brooks, he truly looked beyond the perfectly pressed uniform, beyond the polite smile, and beyond the quiet professionalism. He saw the exhaustion she had hidden with remarkable grace, the quiet courage reflected in her tired eyes, and the extraordinary strength of a woman who had carried impossible burdens without allowing them to diminish her kindness toward anyone else. At that moment, William understood that the person standing before him did not need pity. She deserved to be seen. William Carter stopped only a few feet away, leaving enough space for Emily Brooks to feel respected rather than cornered. For several quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the old maple trees lining the driveway, carrying the faint sound of birdsong across the peaceful estate. Emily lowered her eyes, believing she had somehow created inconvenience for the man whose schedule was planned months in advance. William finally broke the silence with a calm voice that carried none of the authority his employees had grown accustomed to hearing. He asked one simple question. Why did you believe you had to leave without telling anyone the truth? Emily looked down at the envelope she still held against her side before answering with complete honesty. She explained that everyone at the estate had already given her something more valuable than a paycheck. They had given her stability, kindness, and the chance to care for her mother with dignity for as long as she could. She did not want her private hardship to become another responsibility for people who had already done so much. William listened without interrupting. Every word made the weight of his own silence feel heavier. He admitted that the hospital had called only minutes earlier and that he now understood why she had looked so exhausted during recent weeks. Emily's face filled with quiet surprise. She immediately apologized, explaining that she had specifically asked the hospital not to contact anyone from the estate unless absolutely necessary. She never wanted anyone to feel obligated to help because of where she worked. William gently shook his head. He told her that what troubled him was not the phone call. What troubled him was realizing that someone who had spent months making everyone else's lives easier had believed she had to face her greatest challenge completely alone. Emily tried to explain that asking for help had never come easily to her. Since her father passed away years earlier, she had learned to solve every problem one careful step at a time. Working harder had always been the only answer she knew. William looked toward the mansion behind them, remembering every unnoticed act of kindness that had quietly shaped his home. He recalled the flowers that appeared before important meetings, the calm atmosphere guests always complimented, and the employees who somehow worked together with unusual warmth. None of those things had happened by accident. They had grown from the quiet example Emily set every single day. He looked back at her and spoke with complete sincerity. You spent months protecting everyone else's peace while sacrificing your own. That is not weakness. That is extraordinary strength. But strength does not mean carrying every burden by yourself. Emily's composure finally softened. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from embarrassment but from the unfamiliar feeling of being fully understood. For the first time in many months, she no longer felt invisible. She stood before a man who had finally stopped seeing only the uniform she wore and had begun seeing the remarkable character of the woman standing inside it. And in the stillness of that quiet afternoon, both of them understood that this conversation would change far more than either of their lives. William Carter asked Emily Brooks to walk back toward the mansion with him, not as an employee following her employer, but as two people continuing a conversation that should have happened months earlier. Inside the library, sunlight filtered through the tall windows while Mrs. Harper quietly brought tea before leaving them alone without a single unnecessary question. William placed Emily's resignation letter on the table between them and gently slid it back across the polished wood. He told her he could not accept it because it had been written by someone who believed she was facing the future alone, and that was no longer true. Emily listened quietly, unsure how to respond. She explained that her mother's treatment would require more time than she could realistically balance with a full work schedule, and she could not ask the estate to carry that burden. William smiled with calm sincerity and answered that compassion was never a burden when it was given to someone who had spent every day showing compassion to everyone else. He explained that the Carter Foundation would immediately approve assistance for her mother's medical care through its existing patient support program, following the same review standards used for every family. He also insisted that Emily take paid family leave until her mother recovered, adding that her position would remain waiting for her no matter how long healing required. Emily stared at him in stunned silence. For months she had prepared herself to lose everything she had worked so hard to build, yet she had never imagined being offered understanding instead of goodbye. Tears slowly filled her eyes as she whispered that she did not know how she could ever repay such generosity. William gently shook his head and reminded her that she already had. Every unnoticed kindness, every early morning, every encouraging word to a struggling coworker, every small act that made the estate feel like a home instead of merely a beautiful house had already repaid more than anyone realized. During the weeks that followed, Emily devoted her time to caring for her mother without constantly worrying about impossible medical bills or losing the job that had given her hope. Her mother gradually regained strength, and each encouraging update brought quiet relief to everyone at the Carter estate. Employees who had once wondered why William suddenly canceled an important meeting eventually learned only one simple lesson from the experience. The measure of true leadership was never found in power, wealth, or influence. It was revealed in the willingness to notice the quiet people whose goodness held an entire community together. Several months later, when Emily finally returned to work, no grand celebration had been planned. She preferred it that way. Yet as she walked through the front entrance, every employee paused what they were doing for just a moment to welcome her home with warm smiles that needed no speeches. William watched from the staircase, grateful that one unexpected phone call had opened his eyes before it was too late. From that day forward, he made it a habit to learn the stories behind the people who served beside him, because he had discovered a truth that success alone could never teach. The greatest strength often lives inside the quietest heart, and the world becomes a better place whenever someone chooses to see that dignity before it disappears into silence.